Everyone got worried because if the Russians are able to subdue Ukraine, when they come to Poland, it's not going to be a fight. It's going to be a slaughter. NATO forces versus Russia, you're talking about casualty ratios in excess of 100 to 1,000 to 1. I mean, it'll be a blowout. And in that scenario, the Russians will use nukes. So the decision was made early that any weapons system that the Ukrainians can prove that they can operate and maintain, very important detail, maintain, they can have. And so we've just been steadily ratcheting up the technical assistance in order to help them absorb as much as possible. F-16s are the newest one, and this will continue. Because as long as we keep the fight in Ukraine, then we don't have to worry about a general nuclear exchange over Poland or Romania or Latvia or now Finland. The risk moving forward, and I don't think we're going to reach this year, is let's say the Ukrainians are wildly successful and they manage to get the Russians out of all of their territory inside, including Crimea. That doesn't stop the war. The Russians will keep pushing until they can't. Now that they've paid the price for a war but gotten none of the benefits, they can't back down now. It would lead to it would lead to government disintegration. Russia usually faces revolutions when it's defeated in a war, which means that Ukraine has to cross the border into Russia to break up the logistical capacity of the Russians to launch the war in the first place. And at a minimum, that means neutralizing Belgorod and Rostov-on-Don. And now if you've got Ukrainian forces crossing the border, all of a sudden the nuclear question comes back into play from a defensive point of view. So we are only at the very beginning of this conflict. I gotta admit, I am shocked at how well the Ukrainians have done. I've never been so happy to be wrong. I was convinced that this was all going to be wrapped up in under a year. But the Russians can't back down. And in the end of the day, if the Ukrainians are great, they have to push forward. So this is going to become a broader conflict one way or another. And that introduces a lot of wild cards that we're not ready for, and I'm not sure we can. Well, let's start with the offensive issue. The problem with predicting what's going to happen with this war is for the Ukrainians, they're doing everything for the first time. So they repelled an assault for the first time using irregular forces. They launched an infantry-heavy assault on Kharkiv for the first time. They're now getting ready to do a combined arms for the first time. We have no track record here to draw from. As for the Russians, they have underperformed by every possible measure. And so, yes, they've built a lot of defensive fortifications. But if their defensive fortifications were built like their military was planned, well, then they're probably not worth anything. So we just don't know. As for the Chinese, I don't think so. I think we'd have to have a pretty sharp change in circumstance for the Chinese to even consider getting involved. They know that if they provide lethal aid, that will flip the Europeans from being neutral to hostile. And we're actually kind of edging in that direction already. It's really only the Germans and the French who are still kind of towing the line that we need to have a constructive partnership with the Chinese. Weapons would shift that completely. The Germans really have bellied up to the bar over the course of the last 6 months, and they're in it to win it now. That doesn't mean that the Chinese can't provide some assistance. There's non-lethal aid that is already flowing, and more importantly are the semiconductors that can come up and help the Russians finish some of the weapons that they used to rely on off-the-shelf technology from the West, which I always thought was, from a security point of view, really, really, really dumb. But, globalization has done some strange things. So the Chinese are now the primary vehicle for getting that sort of help in, and that is really important. If there was some way to lock that off, it would really hurt the Russians in terms of missiles and especially optics on things like tanks. But for now, those flows are there. Providing more than that risks a rupture. And in today's environment, when the Chinese are under pressure from so many different angles, someone targeting trade directly would probably be enough to push them over the edge. Yeah, I'm afraid that the green transition in its current form is a horrible idea. The technology really just isn't ready. Solar panels and wind turbines are great if you're in places that are sunny or windy, but that's not where 85% of the world's population lives. And in most places, especially places like Moscow or Berlin or Paris or New York or Toronto, if you put up solar panels, you're never going to generate enough electricity to pay down the carbon debt that it took to build them in the first place. Just leave the economics to the side. The carbon side is a disaster. But there's a broader problem here, and that's we won't be able to build the stuff in the first place. If we really do want to decarbonize and hit net zero, then by the year 2030, we need 2 to 3 times as much copper and 10 times as much nickel and 18 times as much lithium and on and on and on and on. Humanity has never doubled the volume of any industrial material that was already in use in a 10-year period. And now we have to do this for 11 different materials and a lot more than doubling? No, can't be done. Now, there's enough out there for the United States, but that would require the United States conquering Congo and taking a big bite out of northern Russia and parts of northern China and South Africa. That's probably not going to happen. We just need a new technological breakthrough in material science before we do this at scale. So I'm concerned that a lot of what we're doing right now is wasting capital and increasing our carbon footprint in the name of reducing our carbon footprint. Let's start by saying that when it comes to international institutions, they only have as much power as their member states give them, and that makes them fairly truncated. They're talk shops, that's useful, but they're not into governance in any meaningful way. The institution that's going to be most important moving forward is the U.S. Federal Reserve. We're entering a world where most of the major countries don't have enough young people to consume. And what is monetary policy if not the ability to regulate consumption? So we have exited the last period of synchronized global consumption-led growth. We'll never have that again because there aren't enough people. And when we get to the next downturn, whenever that is, only the Federal Reserve is going to have the tools necessary in order to stimulate consumption in the United States again, which means the United States de facto is going to be setting monetary policy for the world because the Europeans, the Japanese, and the rest won't be able to do anything. It doesn't matter if you drop interest rates if there's no one there to buy. So we're seeing this breakup and this unification of the global economic system all at the same time, with one authority basically setting policy for everyone, but the trade links that allowed that policy to percolate everywhere more or less going away. We're entering unknown territory here. I mean, we've had ups and downs and unifications and breakups and trade systems over and over and over through history, but we've never had the sort of build that we've seen under globalization, where we basically all joined a single global whole with differentiated supply chains and materials crossing the globe as a matter of course. There was also always population growth before, so even if you did break away, you'd still have something to build on. We don't have that. If we do have a degree of breakup, there are places that have more going for them than others. One of the big things about globalization is the United States basically declared that geography doesn't matter, that we'll take care of security. You can access our market and everyone else's market as long as you side with us against the Soviets. And that created the global system. You break that down, and geography matters again because you're going to have to do a lot of it yourselves. The 4 countries that kind of have the magic mix of geographic features that give them security and an economic shot are France, especially post-EU, Turkey today, although they have to get through a financial crisis first, Japan, which even though it has horrible demographics, it's been grappling with this and addressing that issue now for 40 years and has done a decent job, and Argentina, which I will never say is a country you should follow financially, but they have the assets and the physical location to persist in their current form for at least another century, and compared to most countries, that's just not on the cards. Those plus the United States, those 5 are the ones that are going to be able to influence their own neighborhoods to their own liking. And then there's kind of a secondary set where the demographics are pretty good, the security is pretty good. They won't be able to project power, but they're going to be very good by themselves. All of Southeast Asia falls into that bucket, and a fair amount of Latin America, especially Mexico, does as well. So it's not that we're going to see a world of no growth. It's we're going to see a very split world with some parts of it doing very, very well.